Gregory and Aileen met at church and immediately caught each other's attention.
The first time I met him, I loved his eyes.
The way she talked was very sweet.
He is very secure of himself.
I approached her personally and introduced myself.
And that is something that called my attention.
She was very gentle.
He's very intelligent.
I think those were the things that caught my attention and, stirred something in me.
He had been my only boyfriend. We got married when I was 23 and he was 24.
And of course, the expectations was that everything was going to be perfect.
I thought that I was getting married to be happy. But after a while, I realized that it wasn't that easy.
As years passed, Gregory became very involved in the leadership at their church.
I was very passionate. I started working with youth and then I started singing. I love singing. Then I became, one of the worship directors. It was my hardest working day. It was a Sunday, and I was a full-time worker in the bank that I used to work for.
Aileen was so different from Gregory. She wasn't crazy about the busyness of his schedule or the amount of social activities they had at church.
I was very timid. I preferred to stay back at home than being with people.
I was very frustrated not to have my best friend to share my passion in ministry. And every week, every 2 weeks, that we had an argument on that.
As time progressed, Aileen gave all of her attention to motherhood while Gregory threw himself into work and church. As a result, their marriage grew increasingly distant.
I gave myself to my daughter, and also at the same time, I left my husband to his work and to the church and to whatever he wanted to do.
So my life was pretty caught up in doing, getting too involved in the doing rather than in the being. And you start to lose track a little bit of what you do when you are serving the Lord.
After the birth of their twins, Aileen found herself incredibly lonely. But that motivated her to join a Bible study produced by Revive Our Hearts called Seeking Him.
It was the right time for me to do that because God confronted me with my sins and He made me focus on what He wanted to do in my life, nobody else's life but mine.
Not long after the study was over, Aileen went with a group of women from her church in the Dominican Republic to the very first Revive Our Hearts National Women's Conference, True Woman 08 in Chicago.
And it was overwhelming when we got there and we saw all these women. Wow, incredible. I was going back home with a backpack full of information to put in practice and with a lot of resources and things that I had to think about and change in my life.
When Aileen returned from True Woman, she began helping to translate Seeking Him into Spanish. But this time, Gregory also joined her in going through the study.
My wife and I were doing Seeking Him together. She was translating the book, but separately I was being ministered in a very personal way through the same material.
I was supposed to translate chapters 10, I think, that it was about purity, and every chapter starts with a story.
That particular chapter in Seeking Him told the story of a family that was unraveling due to sexual sin.
And while I was translating that, the Holy Spirit came over me and asked me, "You have to ask your husband about this." But I was concerned about my husband's spiritual health. I sensed that something was wrong. I first gave him the book to read the story, and after he read the story, I asked him, looking into his eyes, "Is there something that you have to tell me?"
I felt that was the day the Lord was also preparing me to be brave enough to confess to her. I got too close to a female person. It was within the church, so it was a Christian person. At the end of the day, something happened and I slipped. And I ended up sinning against God with this person and against my wife. But I didn't say anything. It was the consequences of doing anything was too high. I said, if I have to slay myself and save the church, I'll do it. My biggest fear was the damage to the church and to my reputation. And then my mind tried to play tricks with me, saying, for the sake of the church and this ministry that is growing so much, and I mean, you're one of the faces of the church, it's better, if we leave it like this, and I'm sorry, Lord, I'm sorry. And we thought that everything could be okay. But the Lord knew better. And I felt, of course, a huge burden in my soul, in my spirit, and the Holy Spirit continuously confronted me. And the Lord used the material, the book, Seeking Him from Revive Our Hearts, especially in those chapters in which your soul is searched through in a very deep way. And I was confronted with my sin.
I was very, very mad, betrayed. I asked some questions about him and this other person, and then the Holy Spirit showed me that anger that I just experienced was a sin as bad as what he had just confessed to me, and that I was also a sinful woman before Christ.
After this shocking revelation, Aileen knew that the only way to move forward was through forgiveness. So, in the midst of her own pain, she chose to forgive her husband who had hurt her so deeply.
When my wife decided to grant me her forgiveness was a refreshment from the grace of God. So having her forgiveness, it was like a true second chance.
Gregory and Aileen began the long journey of public confession, counseling, and reconciliation. During this time, prayer played a huge role in changing their hearts toward each other.
One of the things that after the restoration process began was that we started praying for each other.
If I wanted to be consistent with the forgiveness I was given to him and to this other lady, I had to pray.
And as they prayed, they changed dramatically. Gregory, who had once been so overcommitted, distant, and secretive, began loving, giving, and serving his wife. And Aileen, who had been resistant, timid, and not invested in their marriage, began serving her husband and also serving others around her. I've had the chance to watch Gregory and Aileen go through a lot of this journey, and what a joy it is today to see a marriage that is marked by such a sweet, unconditional, powerful love.
Even though we have gone into struggle in our marriage and difficult times, because of the presence of the Lord in our hearts, I can tell you that even though my husband has hurt me deeply, I love him more today than when I met him. Only God can do all things new.
Well, when I look at my wife today, I see a woman which is covered by His grace. Now I see a woman that really is putting God above everything else, and then our marriage, it's second, and her husband is her priority. And then together, we take care of everything else.
We constantly say to each other, wow, God has been so good because of the relationship we have. It's awesome.
I humble myself every day and tell her we need God every day. We need the gospel every day, and help me every day because I need that.
And it's such a blessing to have a fulfilling marriage. And he is my favorite person in the whole wide world.
And now she's my first fan. We share everything. God can make all things new and even better.